Hello everybody, my name is Paolo from Technology Optimized. You probably already know me for the best settings for LG OLEDs from 2017 up to 2022 models, which I posted both on resetera.com forums, but also on Reddit and AWS forums and other websites and communities. And I decided, starting from today, also to open my YouTube channel in order to provide, on top of all the suggested settings and the optimized settings, written in a text form, also step-by-step guide in video walkthrough factor, which could help a lot more users in set up their LG OLED out of the box. I apologize for my English, because as you probably noticed, I am not a native English speaker, so sorry if you will hear some pronunciation errors or grammar errors in English. But I think that providing this kind of guides in English is still much more useful and can reach a broader audience compared to doing it in Italian. So I started with my first video here on YouTube with my old LG B7 OLED. So this is a video which will squeeze out the most of your 2017 LG OLED, B7, C7, G7, E7, all the variants of that year. Because this was the TV that started all. I also have a C1, but I decided to skip that guide for now, because I will receive an LG G3, the breakthrough new technology, MLA technology in it, will arrive around spring, and I decided that I will do a comprehensive guide for that, which will automatically be very compatible also with the 2022 series and 2021 series. So I will do just one video which almost for certainty will cover all these years OLEDs on top of the new changes for the 2023 series. So starting from B7, this TV was great and still is great after all these years. I personally have no defects on my unit, and I think that it's looking better now than it was 6 years ago. And before starting calibrating, I would like also to explain what is my methodology. I basically always start with the most reliable sources for calibration, so airthings.com, HDTV test, AWS forums, but also many other sources I have to obtain the most accurate settings for all the LG OLEDs. But starting from there, from those let's say universally accepted as the most accurate possible settings, I also add on top my personal experience, both with games and movies, with my own measurements, own feedback, both in a dark room and a light room, bright room, sorry. And I also collect and gather all the users' feedback, both on forums and Reddit and other communities, which sometimes can even improve further those, let's say, universally praised settings. So this is the culmination of years of work, so I hope you like it, starting from B7. Okay, first of all, let's go to the gear button, all settings, and let's tweak some general settings. So let's go to the general tab. And here you can tweak some settings. So you can choose, for example, Quick Start Plus to make the apps go to standby and quick resume from standby. I leave it on. Standby light, I leave it on. Advertisement, I suggest to go in there. and enable limit advertisement tracking. So this will slow down a bit the advertisement you receive from LG. You can leave all the other things on, but you can go to the home settings here and also disable these two settings. The home auto launch, which is very annoying as the first thing to see when you turn off the TV, and home promotion will also turn off some advertisements and ads from the TV. So I suggest to turn both off. Also make sure that the home store mode is set to home mode. Another important thing to consider is that for each signal, so for WebOS application, for consoles, for each HDMI input, you must go to the sound section, and I highly recommend to go to the EVO Sync adjustment here to enable this for all signal, all input. Enable EVO Sync adjustment and set it to -5. This will improve the audio delay, especially from Dolby Surround sources or Dolby Atmos sources. This will improve a bit the audio sync with the sources. This settings is independent, like said, by the input, so it's not a universal settings, but you need to set up, enable this and set to -5 for all inputs and HDMI. Still on the sound section, if you use an external sound speaker, you can go to the sound out and select the audio out optical HDMI ARC. I have an external soundbar connected to my HDMI 2 port, which is has the ARC function, and it's important to select the digital sound out to auto and simply link HDMI CEC to on. This will provide the most accurate sound, so the surround sound will be preserved, and the TV also will be controllable from modern console and devices like Xbox Series X and the PS5. So for SDR, for movies and TV, just open any app like the inbuilt Netflix app and open an SDR show like Better Call Saul first season, which is only SDR with WebOS. So once you made sure you have opened an SDR content, go to the gear all settings, picture, and here for each input, WebOS is meant as a separate input, but also for each HDMI port you're using, go to OLED panel settings and make sure screen shift is enabled. This will basically move pixels around the screen, avoiding image retention and burn-in. Leave it on. Eye comfort mode disable, energy saving off. Those two disabled will make sure to use the max luminance of the panel, which you want. Aspect ratio, leave it original, because original will preserve 4/3 aspect ratio for all their movies. So it's recommended to be set this way for multimedia content. And now this is the most interesting change I made over the years. Yes, I'm using the game mode for SDR, and I'll explain to you why. Out of the box, ESF Expert Darkroom is the most accurate preset, but thanks to ColorControl app, which I will link in the description below, you'll find a guide on how to basically unlock all the locked out settings for all modes and all inputs of the TV, so having the full control of the TV. By doing so, game can be even better than ESF Expert Dark, and I'll show you how. With the game preset, so picture mode game, OLED Light 80 is equivalent of ESF Expert OLED Light 70, and I think this is an happy medium for let's say very dim room or not so bright room. If this is too bright for you in a totally dark room, you can lower this value without losing accuracy. or in a very bright room you can further increase it, but I wouldn't go over 90 in order to avoid image retention. Contrast 85 is correct, so all the other settings are equivalent to expert darkroom. Contrast 85, brightness 50, sharpness 0. This is the actual neutral value of the TV. Usually LG loves to set this to 10, but 10 is actually an image upscaling algorithm similar to anti-aliasing, which will make text blurrier, which you don't want. So manually setting this to 0 will actually have more sharpness, so the raw sharpness of the image without over sharpening or upscaling. So leave it to 0 for let's say native 4K contents, but if you watch TV from cable or very low res content like 480p or 720p or 1080i from cable TV, you can set this to 25, up to 25 without noticeable over sharpening artifacts. Color 50 is correct thanks to ColorControl, because I will show you how in a couple of seconds. Tint green 10, this will offset a reddish tint, brown tint of the TV of 2017 series. So this will offset this defect and improve accuracy of the SDR mode. Color temperature, this is one of the reasons I choose game also for movies, thanks to ColorControl, because you can have color temperature to warm 40, which is slightly colder than warm 50, which is equal to warm 2 of the SF Expert dark room. I found that warm 2 was a bit too yellow or brown, and warm 1 was too cold and equal to warm 25. Warm 40 is even more accurate and even more pleasant to the eye. So game mode will let you adjust the slider like this, because while the ESF darkroom only has warm 1, warm 2, warm 3 to select, but not a numerical slider with precision setting like this. So setting to warm 40 for best temperature of the image, both in SDR, HDR and DOLBY VISION. Advanced control, dynamic contrast off, dynamic color off, preferred colored all to 0, so don't touch this. Color gamut, this is why color is back to 50 finally on 2017 OLEDs in game mode, because previously game mode was limited by color gamut wide, forced wide in game mode. This is finally possible to be forced to auto, which is the most correct settings and has the best results with the color 50. So thanks to ColorControl, set the color gamut to auto. Super resolution off, same thing for sharpness. For native 4K content, so for higher resolution contents, leave it off, but if you watch cable TV or very low resolution contents, you can enable this to high, and high will only work with the sharpness value set to 25. So just remember that for lower resolution content. In this case, I will leave it off. Gamma medium, which is equal to 2.2, which I found a bit better compared to BT 1886, as this will preserve shadow detail better, especially in not totally dark rooms. So also in dim rooms and bright rooms, you will see more shadow detail, and it's a more universal value compared to BT 1886. So I leave it to medium. Go to picture options, noise reduction off and peg noise reduction off. Also these two, leave it off for higher resolution contents, but you can enable both to low for cable TV with lower res contents, like I said before, also for sharpness and super resolution. In my case, leave it off. Black level, I was also able to force this to low. So because black level low is the best settings you can have with these OLEDs. I also explain in my Patreon and in the description below why is this the case, because these TV basically are pre-calibrated with black level low in mind, and 95% of all movies and games are also mastered with black level or legal video range to low with standard video range. Don't use high except for real PC usage, for example with web browser or graphic application like Photoshop, Premiere, Adobe Illustrator and other graphic application which can require the full RGB range. But for movies and games it's always best to force to low, also to fix black level mismatch which could ruin the image, the picture quality and the shadows detail. Real cinema, I also force this to on, because in game mode real cinema is forced to off to preserve input lag, but for input like WebOS or Blu-ray players and so on, you can force game mode with real cinema on in order to fix judder in movies. Motion eye care off, true motion off, because real cinema is more than enough to compensate the stutter of the 24p movies. True motion here has some presets made by LG, but I found that on 2017 series, whatever setting you enable of True motion, you will immediately notice soap opera effect and stutter and strange movement and artifacts. So I highly don't recommend to use True motion, but only use real cinema on for this TV. So this is SDR. Now we can move to HDR. Okay, for HDR for movies, same thing for SDR, just launch an HDR content. You can basically go to YouTube and search the keywords HDR and for example launch this video, and once you launch this video you can go to all settings again, and you will see that the preset has switched to the HDR preset. Here it's a bit different, because I don't recommend using the game mode here like the SDR, because game mode on 2017 OLEDs does not support dynamic tone mapping, and the dynamic tone mapping is highly recommended for movies, because it was born exactly for this reason, in order to improve the static metadata of movies, which we can change from a movies to another, and not having it available to game is a no-go for movies. But I prefer Cinema Home to Cinema, because by default Cinema is the most accurate, of course, but Cinema Home can be better once changed. With the same settings is identical to Cinema, but Cinema Home has the numerical slider for color temperature like I showed you before for SDR game. So choose Cinema Mode Home as a HDR picture mode. Also here you can see HDR as a prefix to be sure that you are changing HDR preset. Here OLED light 100 is correct for HDR, because this doesn't mean that you have the TV in torch mode, but also means that the peak highlight will be at the maximum luminance, but this does not mean that all the picture is super bright, but only the specular highlights. So leave it to 100. Contrast 100 for the same reason. Brightness 49. I suggest to decrease by one click the default brightness, because dynamic tone mapping, which is super useful, sometimes tends though to raise blacks, especially on black bars and pure blacks, just a little. So This brightness 49 settings will offset these black level rays, which sometimes can happen with dynamic tone mapping. So leave it 49. Sharpness 0, color 55, which is correct by default. Tint 0, here you don't have to change anything in HDR wise. Color temperature W40 for the same reasons of SDR, and this is the reason why I've chosen the Cinema Home preset for HDR, because you can have warm 40 also here. Advanced controls, dynamic contrast low. This is not dynamic contrast, this will enable dynamic tone mapping. So this, like I said, is very useful to always leverage the full capabilities and peak HDR luminance of the display of the TV. Movies, HDR movies all have static metadata, usually have 4000 nits peak HDR luminance, which you cannot change, on the contrary of games. So dynamic tone mapping will always try to adjust at best those very high peak HDR luminance for the real capability of the display, so leave it low. Dynamic color off, preferred color also here 000. Color gamut auto is also correct for HDR. Super resolution off for the same reasons of SDR, but in this case, usually when a content is in HDR, it means that the native resolution is 4K or anyway very high resolution, so always leave it off here. Gamma medium is always correct for HDR. It's equal to 2.2 gamma. Go to the picture options, noise reduction off, MPEG noise reduction off. Also for the same reason, always leave this off for HDR. Black level always low. Real cinema on for the same reason. Motion eye care off, true motion off. And this is all for HDR for movies. Okay, for Dolby Vision, just do the same. Launch a Dolby Vision movie. In my case, I just picked the Cabinet of Curiosities on Netflix, which is a Dolby Vision recent title with Guillermo del Toro, which is very good. I highly recommend you. Go to all settings. While being in Dolby Vision, go to the preset. You can see Dolby Vision picture mode. This time the gain preset of Dolby Vision is the best, because cinema should be the most accurate preset of the TV, but in reality it's really dim. I think it's dimmer than reference 2, so it's not that accurate, while Cinema Home, which is a variant of cinema, is too bright as a raised, let's say, mid-range, which is too bright and also lose some contrast compared to the creator intent. The gain picture mode is an happy medium between the two, so it's brighter than cinema but less bright than Cinema Home, so it's basically perfect, what you want. And thanks to ColorControl, can also be the best preset for Dolby Vision movies. So select gain. On 2017 series, they work a bit differently, because here OLED light 50 is equivalent of the HDR OLED light 100. So just leave it to 50 because it's correct. Contrast 100, it's okay. Brightness 49 for a similar reason of dynamic tone mapping. I found that Dolby Vision here, all presets can sometime raise the blacks, especially the black bars, but setting it to 49 will fix it without black crash. Sharpness always 0 in Dolby Vision. Color 50 is correct. Tint 0. Color temperature, this is another plus of the gain mode, because on top of having a better tone mapping, you can select warm 40 and being consistent with all the other modes. So select warm 40 also here. Advanced controls. Dynamic contrast here is set to off because it's dynamic metadata is native with Dolby Vision, so you don't need dynamic tone mapping here, and it's also not supported. Dynamic color off. Preferred color 000, it's correct. Color gamut is forced to wide, but this is correct because Dolby Vision, all Dolby Vision content are mastered with wide gamut for LG to look correct, so leave it wide. Super resolution off is also correct because same for HDR, all the contents are higher resolution, so that don't need this. Gamma medium is also correct, gamma 2.2 for Dolby Vision. Same thing, noise reduction off, MPEG noise reduction off. Black level always to low. Real cinema on. This was forced thanks to ColorControl because in game mode this was forced to off to lower input lag, but for WebOS, Blu-ray players and so on, you can leave it to on for movies. Motion eye care off, True Motion off, and you're good to go and have the best Dolby Vision preset for movies. Okay, it's time to talk about gaming. For example, I'm on Xbox Series X, but this will apply also for PS5 about the settings of the TV. So make sure to be in SDR with Xbox Series X. Just stay in the dashboard and you'll be sure to be in SDR. Click the gear button, go to all settings. This is very important, major difference. Every time you set up a game console or PC, change the aspect ratio to 16:9 and not original anymore with the just scan option on. This also applies to the previous input. This because the aspect ratio 16:9 is the only one which will assure you the lowest input lag all the time, while I found that original can sometimes increase the input lag with spikes, some spikes for some games in let's say an erratic way. So just leave it to 16:9 to be sure that the input lag is always low. Of course, select the game mode this time and set it up exactly like we have seen for movies. So OLED light 80, contrast 85, brightness 50, sharpness 0, color 50, tint green 10 for the same reason, color temperature warm 40. On the advanced control, dynamic contrast off, dynamic color off, preferred color 000. Color gamut, this was finally forced again to auto as the best setting thanks to ColorControl app. Super resolution, I would always leave it to off, both because current consoles generally have high resolution, but also to preserve low input lag. If you use Switch, Nintendo Switch, maybe you can enable this to high, coupled with sharpness 25 in order to improve resolution, but you will increase input lag a bit while doing so. So it's your choice if you want a more clear picture, a better upscale picture thanks to super resolution on Switch, or lowest input lag by leaving it to off. Gamma medium, it's the equivalent of 2.2, which is also correct for gaming. Go to picture options, noise reduction off, MPEG noise reduction off, black level always to low. Here, in order to preserve the lowest input lag possible, and considering that most of the content here will be 30 fps or 60 fps and not 24 fps, leave real cinema off. Even with the ColorControl, leave it off. Motion eye care off, True Motion off. So this will ensure the lowest input lag possible, that on this TV should be around 20 milliseconds. For HDR gaming, just launch any HDR game like Halo Infinite in my case. Click the gears button, go to all settings. Make sure to be on game mode. Now here things become interesting because on 2017 models, like I said, dynamic tone mapping is not supported. So for starting, setup like this. OLED light 100 is correct, contrast 100, brightness 50, because like I said, there is no dynamic tone mapping, so you don't need to set it to 49. Sharpness 0. Color, increase it from 55 to 65, because in order to make the picture a bit brighter compared to the in order to offset the absence of dynamic tone mapping, we need to use dynamic contrast, which I will show you in a couple of seconds. Dynamic contrast will desaturate colors a bit, so setting the color from 55 to 65 will offset this behavior. Tint 0 is correct. Color temperature, this is good, like we saw at warm 40. Advanced controls, like I said before, dynamic contrast is recommended to be set to medium. This will be very similar to dynamic tone mapping on most of the time, but as the only downside of desaturating colors a bit. But with color value set to 65, this will be offset mostly. So it's highly recommended to set dynamic contrast medium for the most balanced picture of games. And this also will not increase input lag at all. So just set it to medium with confidence. Dynamic color off, preferred color 000. Color gamut auto is correct. Super resolution off, gamma medium. Picture options, noise reduction off and peg noise reduction off. Black level always low. And for the same reason of SDR gain, leave real cinema, motion eye care and true motion off in order to preserve the lowest input lag possible for games. If you want to watch movies, let's say from time to time, HDR movies, and you need dynamic tone mapping also when using a console like Xbox Series X, just click the preset when launching the movie and just switch from the game preset to the previous recommended preset of Cinema On. This will just enable dynamic tone mapping, while all the other settings will be basically identical. One final note, even if the TV is fully capable of Dolby Vision gaming at 4K 60 Hz, I don't recommend gaming in Dolby Vision at all, both for 2017 OLEDs but also for the newer ones, because Dolby Vision for games is basically a live reconversion of HDR in Dolby Vision inside a Dolby Vision container. It has no real native dynamic metadata with the exception of Halo Infinite, but even with Halo Infinite the final results are much worse, both for contrast and peak HDR luminance compared to properly set up HDR. So I don't recommend gaming in Dolby Vision. And this is all for today. I hope you enjoyed my guide for the LG 2017 setup, and I hope that this guide has actually helped you in achieving a much better picture compared to the most commonly shared settings. If you like the video, please leave a like, subscribe and activate the alerts, ring the bell. This will help me in further create additional guides, especially the new one that I will prepare as soon as my LG G3 will arrive. That guide will also be compatible with 2022 and 2021 models as well, for the most part. So also follow me on patreon.com if you want to support me. You will find all the links in the description below, and see you the next time. Thank you again. From Paolo, Technology Optimized.